So, Back Pocket Films, episode 3, doing your pick, Carnival of Souls. Tell us about your first experiences with this movie.
It's only been about 2 or 3 years now, but it was on during Halloween month on TCM. It was just on, and for some reason I got it confused. When I saw the title, I got it confused with Tobe Hooper's The Funhouse.
Okay.
For some reason, I thought that's the movie we were about to see.
Did you have prior knowledge of Carnival of Souls?
No, not at all. And it starts and right away I'm like, oh, it's not that movie.
Right.
But I keep watching it and yeah, I'm looking at it and I'm like, wow, that's, if David Lynch didn't steal
big time
so much from this movie,
yeah.
And I don't know what. But after watching it, I'm like, where the hell did this movie come from? And that's when I went and I kind of researched about Herk Harvey.
Yeah.
And
what a story.
What a story. And then just the downside, kind of similar to the Night of the Hunter thing of it's his only movie. Didn't really get well received. I mean, he did whatever he could to kind of get behind it and push it into the drive-ins.
I thought of Frankenheimer because we talked about did the disappointment of, or perceived disappointment of Seconds lead him to do what he did in the later part of his career. Right. Same thing here. He didn't make another feature film. Right. A big part of it is because he thought he had failed at it. So.
And then also reading he had such lofty ambitions, and that's the hard part about when you're making something on a budget is I want this to. I think the line was I wanted this to look like Bergman by way of Jean Cocteau, and obviously had a wealth of film knowledge and love and appreciation. But he's also working with a budget, and you can only but some of that imagery is there.
Yeah.
And you feel it.
You can't help but think of La Delante.
Yep.
And some, there's just an ingenuity involved. His technical expertise at making these industrial films and educational films, and what he learned doing that, making 40 short films before he even does this. Right. He has an understanding of how to be economical and maximize the limited resources. Right.
And that's what's so disheartening about it, because he went about it the right way. He's driving by, he sees this location, he's like, wow, that looks so...
Right, gets inspired. I mean, that's where he got the idea for the organ score.
Yep. And looking at it, it feels like, I'm not the first person to say this, but it feels like a feature-length Twilight Zone episode.
Right, Ebert said that, yeah. And of course, it's what you think of, because it's just got that... you're waiting for the other shoe to drop the whole time. I mean, I actually took a note that the film is shot in a way that certain camera angles are meant to make you question everyone and everything in the film. There's 2 scenes in particular that remind me of Lynch. Mrs. Thomas, the landlady, just when she goes, oh, what's the line she says? I just have to find it because it's just it's so good. That must have been a kick in the head. You're like, what? I mean, if that's not right out of a David Lynch movie, and then the other one is the 2 men at the water fountain. Yeah. When you think, and by the way, Harvey played the man. Yeah. Which is just crazy. But the way, I didn't mean to startle you. I was just getting some water. Right. You're like, what is going? And then the shots are just designed to keep you questioning.
And the performances, at one time you could watch it and be like, wow, this is really student film type acting. Right. But when you look at it and think, oh, it's in that kind of David Lynchian way.
There's a lot of Mulholland Drive or that it feels like Mulholland Drive took for this, the solo, the organ solo, the way it feels like she's possessed and someone's playing through her, just like the solo in Mulholland Drive. And in fact, her character reminded me a lot of the Naomi Watts character. Her naivety, her coming to this new scene and trying to, get acquainted and not knowing who to trust. I mean,
even the guy that's trying, like, the creepy guy.
That guy's so really good. He reminds me of like just a Cassavetes character, or like there's this movie High School Confidential that just like he does a good job.
Yeah, and even that, like, it's not that far away from a Dennis Hopper or Lost Highway.
Yep, Robert Blake. Yeah, there is a lurking malevolence to the character, because he shows you. It'd be one thing if he wasn't showing you all of his thoughts while he's doing this, because he'll like turn away and be like, and he'll have this facial expression, and it's like, oh man, like you are nefarious, bro. You are just like not. You're showing us how, like, much you are not honorable and what you're trying to do here.
There's also he's talking to her at the doorway of her apartment, and the door is between them, and just the way he takes his finger and presses against the door. Whether it was a moment, like, whether Herk Harvey said you got to do that or he just did it, it's really well done in retrospect. Like, I think you said before we started that it's a wealth of knowledge about the making of this thing, and that's because it became such a cult favorite.
Right.
And kind of has a similar vibe to Night of the Living Dead in that way, where the making of it and the talking about it is almost as good as watching it just on its own. But because there's so much that you can read about it, I mean, you get to uncover and enjoy it on several different levels. And that's what I think is why I kind of included it, especially kind of like around this Halloween time, is that it's one of those movies you can watch and be so easily inspired by it to just go out and just do your own thing.
When her car is getting worked on, I think Stephen King may have been influenced by that for Christine.
Yeah.
Just because of the way it felt, that scene actually looked like a scene out of John Carpenter's film. And the idea of there being some supernatural elements in that car. She runs out screaming. I mean, the moment after that scene is incredible. And I know that, reading Dance Macabre about Stephen King, he has a wealth of influences, and he loves old horror movies. So
it's got to be on his list. And not only that, but I mean, it's just like the imagery is so striking and so distinct that, I mean, it's impossible to watch this movie and not be affected by it. I mean, when she's driving and his image is in the window, I mean, that's horrifying.
It is. It's truly amazing. It's ahead of its time.
Yep.
There's really been nothing like it. They achieved it using a mirror that was in the corner of the window. I mean, just hearing about like the technique with which they're pulling this stuff off sort of makes you think of Forbidden Planet. What's the movie? Is it Forbidden Planet?
With what?
With Leslie Nielsen.
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes me think of that, of just like the ingenuity involved to pull off some of these things and the illusions. And that's why, like, there's a craft behind this movie, and there's obviously a vision behind this movie that he had. That's why it's so disheartening that's how easy it can for a filmmaker to fold like that just because of response or
the fact that it didn't do what he expected or wanted it to do. But you think that man, if you just made more movies, it probably could have got there.
I mean, hearing about how he went about raising money for this budget, like, okay, I have some amount of social currency in the community. Yep. I'm going to go cash those checks in. I'm going to ask for $500 from each of these businesses and put together 17. I know he had an investor, his new girlfriend was an investor. So it's like it all came together, but it's like the idea that if you just put it out there, if you have a solid screenplay and you just put it out there that you're trying to raise money, it can happen. I love that he gets home after driving by this pavilion, and he goes up to the writer that he's working with at Centron, and he says, "So, I want a screenplay. You can be whatever you want. There just have to be ghouls dancing in a stipulation, but there has to be this scene where there's ghouls dancing, this carnival." And that scene reminded me a lot. There are two parts that reminded me of The Shining. The scene where all the zombies are dancing, and then when there's a shot where she looks in the mirror. It's not the car scene. There's a shot where the face changes in the mirror, and it reminded me of the shot in The Shining, in the hotel room with the mirror.
Well, and also John Carpenter for Halloween, the way Michael Myers is, he'll just be in the background, or she'll be looking out the window, and all of a sudden he'll just be there. I mean, that's
haunting.
It's totally like inspired by this.
Yeah.
And even I don't know if Dana Gould has on the Criterion edition of this, it's like a 10-minute thing where he talks, because he loves this movie, and he talks about it. And the two things that he said that were really great, one is that the creep character, that he almost acts as like it's easier for us as an audience to go ahead and believe that the ghouls are an actual thing, because there's a kind of a middleman character who kind of acts as a bridge between that horrific world and the real world. And that David Lynch does that all the time, where he has a character kind of, it's got 1 foot here, 1 foot there.
Right.
And it just makes it easier for us as an audience to kind of go into that other world.
It's a bit like Clean Shaven, the idea of playing with your audience's a judgment and preconceived notions and assumptions.
Yeah. And then the other thing that he said was that just the whole story of being from a female's perspective, and it's a female character, gives way to the slasher films, but also of that time, Psycho had just came out, and then the Twilight Zone episode, The Hitchhiker, which is about a woman who's driving across the desert and sees the same person every stop that she goes.
I mean, the shot of her driving reminded me of Psycho.
Yeah.
Just the straight-on shot of the windshield, the feel of it, the black and white.
And it's one of those movies where even if you, just because you've seen the story done in a similar way, it's kind of like that Occurrence at Owl Creek type of story. Even when you know it's coming or think that's what it is, doesn't take anything away from the enjoyment of it, because at least for me, what I enjoyed watching it that first time was, wow, how inventive and innovative it is for a clearly low budget film, and yet there's images in it that will stick with me and are truly horrifying.
I mean, you know,
1962.
That shot where the doctor is not facing her. I mean, I knew it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a zombie version of the Doctor.
Yeah.
Or, you know, ghoul, zombie, whatever. You know, but like, and then it turned out to be the man. But it's like it's so great because the buildup is such that you know it's going to be.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And then it's still scary when it happens.
Right.
I think my dad would always talk about the birds that way. Even when you know what's going to happen, it's still because of the artistry with which it's executed.
Yeah.
You still are scared.
Yeah.
When it happens.
You know when she turns around, all the birds are going to be at the playground, right? But it's still, yeah.
Yeah.
What was your take when you were watching? Because you said you'd seen it once.
So
right?
I watched this when I was in my early 20s at World of Video. Mm-hmm. I remember passing it in the. I'd be putting away movies, and I saw 2 Carnivals Assault. You know, I was like, okay, and then I saw there was a remake, and I took this home, and yeah, it was. I immediately could just feel that this was different. You know, really unique, and and that's what makes it kind of poetic, in that it's his only film, like Night of the Hunter, because, or like you look at like John Cazale's limited filmography, the fact that they're all classics. It's kind of like cool to see that it's because he had this, because of his journey. Like if you read that story. He goes and joins the military, and then he's like majoring in chemical engineering, and then it's like, okay, I'm just going to completely switch and go do theater in Kansas. Yep. And then it's like goes that route, and then over time finds that he has these capabilities as a director, yep. a film director, and I think it really speaks to his life path. Mm-hmm. That all converged to create this sort of miraculous concurrence of events and collaboration with what looked like a lot of people from Centron.
Right.
With the exception of Herbert Strock, I think it was, that was the only one who really had like he worked on The Crawling Eye, like all the, you know, various noirs or
now is he the priest?
Sci-fi films. He was the co-editor, I believe. Okay. But it just, you know, you can't help but notice when a lot of these people that are working on this film are, I don't even think I wrote it down, but he's really the only one in that crew that had prior Hollywood experience.
And he was making basically kind of like how-to videos for Centron, the company.
Yeah, and right? Travel films, and
which is... it's like that was his film school, and then when he goes to make a movie, he can use all of those tools, and that he did theater. That comes into play too, because there is a theatricality to everything that he does.
Just like Night of the Hunter.
Right.
I mean, you look at Cocteau. That's how Cocteau elevated his films. Right. They had this theatrical. How do you make people believe something in theater? It has to be a coordinated illusion, an orchestrated illusion. Mm-hmm. So if you're bringing that level, if you're not being lazy, and and you know, there's something to that with Lynch as well. There's a theatricality to his films. There's a concentrated focus on essence and like color and like, I don't know. It's very similar. Mm-hmm. Because what you're achieving is almost bigger than cinema. Mulholland Drive is like something. It's like it just appeared. Right. It's like the monolith. Right. It's like what is this?
Yeah.
And I think it's almost, you could say the same for this, because it just feels so kind of unearthly. It's like the product of a really cool mind.
Yeah, I couldn't help on this viewing, watching it and being like, okay, how did he get all of these things done? Because this is some pretty remarkable things for even a low budget movie. Mm-hmm. You know, you feel like the opening, the chase on the bridge, and then that he gets to actually drop a car from
they,
the bridge into
you
the
know,
water.
they asked, and the only thing, the stipulation that the town had was that they had to repair the bridge.
Yeah.
And it was like $38 or something. Like,
but I'm looking at it and
cool.
I'm like, okay, so they just took that, like that, whatever that guardrail is, they just cut that and took that piece off. And then I'm looking at the cut, and it's like the cut is the car kind of veers off, and then the next cut is the car just being dropped.
I mean, that straight on shot of, I mean, there's parts of Stand By Me that remind me of that.
Yep.
It's
racing.
It's this film is a collection of awesome set pieces. Throughout the film, you just notice it. You're like, oh, look at how powerful this part is, and I think that was their strength, is that propped up the whole film, and then that allowed them to kind of have these weird in-between scenes that inspired someone like Lynch, who finds the humor in them. Because you could easily, like, and whether it was implied or not, they just are. Right? They're just weird, these scenes, some of them.
Right down to the, again, the performances is like, it's like just saying, like, no, just, you know, be as folksy as you can be. You know, just be you. I even think like for me this time watching it, I'm like, oh, the psychiatrist isn't really doing anything for me in the acting wise, but it's like, well, if he just hired whether it was, I don't know if it was an actor playing a psychiatrist or you just found a psychiatrist, but it's like you're just, I talked about this with Blue Velvet. It's like, you know, that's a human ear, all right. It's like he's not gonna, you know, he's not gonna play into the moment. It's like, oh my God, where'd you find this?
See, like Lynch plays with tropes a lot. Very aware that they are, you know, and it's kind of fun for him. I think he gets a kick out of making someone think that something might be something else. It's like, so it's cool to see that this clearly was an influence on someone like him. It ended up becoming just probably one of the most unique creative minds in Hollywood history.
And everything about it, from the way the title shows up on the screen,
so good,
to, let's just talk about the music, the organ score.
It's jarring.
It's jarring, and it's one of those things where it's like, well, it totally makes sense if that's what she does. But I kind of wonder what came first with them. But also, just as a stroke of genius, is how do you set your movie apart from every other movie? You score it with an organ, you know? And it's just one of those little ideas where it ends up working. It doesn't end up being...
It just did not feel like a Hollywood film.
No.
At all.
But again, you can see it playing at a drive-in. Right? On a double bill with another...
Well, I think that's what's so impressive about it is it has a shoestring budget, but it doesn't feel like a B movie. It did not have those moments that a B movie has where you're like, oh, I have affection for this film, but clearly it's playing in the minor leagues, and that's okay. But this did not feel like this. This felt like there was something else going on, something else at work that elevated it above those other films.
And maybe it was just as simple as him saying, I love Bergman films, I love Jean Cocteau, I love Beauty and the Beast. I want to do that. I don't want to do, you know, I don't want to do Night of the Lepus. I don't want to do Giant Rabbits. I don't want to do a giant caterpillar or whatever the hell it is. You know, I want to do that. Like, what's really at my fear? Like, what if I was dead and I didn't know?
I thought that the way Herk Harvey looked as the man had an influence on the tall man in Phantasm. Definitely had just the suit. I mean, the suit, the look, the hair, the whole vibe. Old dude, like, because Phantasm used to scare the crap out of me when I was a kid, and that's a very striking, like, disturbing image.
the makeup is very effective, not just for him, but for everything else.
Yeah.
And you can almost, you can sort of see where George Romero may have gotten a little bit of influence on that for Night of the Living Dead, and
Right.
how he wants his zombies, his
And some of
ghouls
that's
to look.
lighting too, I would imagine.
Yeah.
If you adjust lighting, it can make someone look more pallid or more emaciated or any of that with the right combination of makeup.
When you first saw it, did you kind of know what the trajectory of the story was going to be? Was the reveal a surprise to you, or you were just so involved with the look of it that you just didn't care?
I don't think I really anticipated the reveal.
Because isn't it like Psycho? It ends with pulling a car out of a water, right?
Yeah.
And then just the image of her in the car, and it is a little.
That almost feels like occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge too, just the way it like loops back to that initial moment.
Right.
As if none of this had happened, and as if it was all in the mind.
Which again is another, I know it was a short film by a French filmmaker, and then Rod Serling saw it and said, I want to make this an episode of The Twilight Zone. But that is a Twilight Zone connection.
Yeah.
On the technical side of things, it's the opening. Going back and watching it again, so the whole opening of the film, so the race, and then the car goes over, and then the whole thing of them searching and trying to find it, everything is looped, and it's just dubbed over dialogue, and you can kind of tell in a couple of instances, which is kind of a shame for the opening.
Right.
But I feel like if you're showing someone this for the first time, and this happened with Robin, is the movie's kind of going along and she's, not really sure if she's in it or not. But then that shot of her driving and that image of him in the window is just kind of like a what the F moment.
Amber really dug it.
Yeah.
I mean, she loves horror movies anyway, and I think she just could not believe like how effective some of these parts were for 1962, especially the car window shot. Like it's just really, it's like a jump scare without really being a jump scare. I mean, it's like not trying to be. I think jump scares have kind of become this thing that are a little bit contrived, and a substitute for actual scares. When really this is like just true, like it's gonna make you jump out of your seat because you don't expect it.
And that's because she would have turned, saw it, and it would have,
I just got chills remembering what it looks like to see his face in that car window. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it truly is, and that they just play it. It's not like he's doing anything.
And then there's a figure in the road, and she drives off the road.
Yeah.
I mean, the plot is. Just like Psycho with the having to stop and get the car checked. There's definitely a bit of a borrowed trajectory that I think John Clifford might have, when he wrote, maybe was a little bit like, well, we could use this. This worked so well in this, and it's not like a ripoff. They've got their own. And I think that's definitely sort of a guideline for future screenwriters and directors is like, hey, as long as you have your skeleton, and it's yours, your skeleton.
And it's perfectly okay to be inspired by or influenced by another film or another
Sometimes
filmmaker.
it's an arrow to your characters and your story.
And it may have even been for Herk Harvey is like, well, Hitchcock did that movie with his little television crew and did it on the cheap.
We forgot to mention that Herk Harvey was in the same general area as Robert Altman when Robert Altman was making similar when he was making low budget films, and there was someone that Harvey worked with that was. I just want to find it. So his assistant director on the film was Reza Badiyi, however you pronounce it, who had emigrated from Iran and had just started to work in America, and he was second unit director on Altman's debut film, The Delinquents.
Wow.
So Carnival of Souls was his second film that he worked on, and he would go on to make some of the most well-known iconic series openings ever: Hawaii Five-0, Get Smart, Mary Tyler Moore Show. So it's interesting to see someone who, so this is in this series of these like things for this one guy who ended up becoming,
wow,
you know, behind the scenes of like some pretty iconic stuff. And I read that Harvey received direct influence from seeing what Altman did in Kansas City. So he was in Lawrence, Kansas,
yeah,
and then in Kansas City he sees Altman doing all this with a low budget, wow. And he's like, we can do that. Yeah. So,
you think they met, or did he just?
I don't know. I think he was just a peer, wow. You know, and I don't know if but he definitely was part of that scene early on. So kind of cool.
I like thinking about them meeting
yeah.
at that point in their careers.
Right.
Kind of, you know, swapping ideas and just talking about.
There's a
like,
chance
this is
they
how
did. I mean,
yeah.
Who knows who was making feature films in that area at that time?
I think this is it's a really cool underground movie that you can watch. It's a staple now for every Halloween for us, and I just think it's a cool thing to discover.
Yeah.
Because it was for me. That's how it was introduced. Like I just happened to be on TCM. I happened to watch it, and keep watching it.
Have you seen the remake?
No.
Neither have I.
Who did the remake?
I forget. I'm a completionist though, so I definitely I'm gonna have to watch it. Yeah.
What year was that? And it was a
90 something.
Wow. And it was a remake?
Pretty sure. It might have been kind of an in name only type thing.
But I think it would be a really cool thing to double feature with a Psycho or a Night of the Living Dead. Like I think you can have like a really cool night of watching those types of movies. Even just thinking like the last 3 horror movies that we watched was this, Night of the Living Dead, and Texas Chainsaw. It's like it belongs in that same family of look what you can do with a limited budget for a horror film.
You know what would be another good double bill is this with Exterminating Angel. Similar vibe of, in fact, the scenes when no one can hear her or see her reminded me of some of the ambiguous supernatural kind of elements to Exterminating Angel and the way that feels.
Buñuel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And guess who else was influenced by Buñuel? Probably is David Lynch. So
you had a heavy diet of
this
type of movie. And it's weird, like, you know, I don't think I've ever read an interview or listened to him talk about things that he liked watching, or that he was influenced by. But I mean, if I ever saw one and he was like, I'd never seen Carnival of Souls, I'd never seen it.
There's a chance.
You're lying. You're lying.
I mean, I don't know. It just,
But I mean, it's just too. It's impossible to watch this movie and not think of that.
Absolutely.
I feel as when you have those movies in your mind. I mean, it's just.
You know, it's similar to jazz, and how, you know, parts of jazz are completely like following a more traditional rhythm, but then there's parts that can just deviate, and as long as everyone involved is on the same page, you can make it work as a transition and navigate those kind of unpredictable paths. And I feel like that is a bit what goes on in a Lynch film and what's going on here, because there's clearly just, they're trying to do something different. Like it does not feel like any other film from the time.
And and I just thought of like for Eraserhead, you know, his carnival at the end of a pier is the smokestacks of the factory. They were there. It was an image from his youth growing up in Pennsylvania, right? Like that's his thing. Like he saw that. It's like, I got to get that in there, and it creates its own atmosphere for the whole movie. Similar. I mean, there's nothing like that image of the carnival, like that broken down carnival. And it is scary, but I can also picture myself being there, you know, and being like, this would be a cool.
You know, so with the theorist, there's the whole part at the carnival, and there's this abandoned amusement park in D.C., like outer lying D.C., called Glen Echo Park. And when I used to go there as a kid, and now it's like completely like run down. I mean, you pass like the place where they had the games, where they had this, and it's like this, it's like amazing. And I just have this like dream of like, I want to shoot the theorist in DC at this place that I know of, that I have memories of, nostalgic memories of.
Well, and just when we went to, when Robin and I went to Salem, we saw on the map that there's an arcade not too far. So we walked to it.
Nice.
And I mean, it was an arcade. I'm sure they opened it up for summer, but it was closed down. But walking around and seeing it boarded up, and
you could sort of feel the energy that used to exist there, right? Like it's palpable.
It feels like a ghost. Like clearly ghosts are here.
Right.
I can hear them. I can smell them. I can, and that's what that. I can just picture him walking, seeing it, stopping, walking to it.
Look at us. I mean, look at the imagery of us at that beach and on that pier and on that boardwalk, and I wonder if, so I mean, Jordan Peele was influenced by Romero. I mean, it would be interesting to, I bet you Jordan Peele has seen Carnival of Souls, and it might have had an impact on him.
I feel like he was sitting on Get Out and Us for so long that he just would make lists of his favorite horror movies and just be like, how do I sneak this in here and sneak that in there? Which is awesome. It makes for a very full. It makes for a full meal. Like you're just watching it and you're just soaked up in the atmosphere and the imagery and just how rich everything is. And that's, I mean, that's what it feels like with this movie. Like with Night of the Hunter, is just like, all right, I'm making my movie. I'm going to put in everything that I want to put in here and make it count. And they do. It's just, I don't know. It's just, it's so disheartening to think that he didn't make another movie, or that he felt so brokenhearted. Of the fact.
Like it's interesting to look at his filmography, because it's like 39 short films, 9 more short films, and an episode of Reading Rainbow. It's like, what? That's it? And granted, it's like, he did well making these films. I'm sure he made money, and he was recognized for them. I was reading that he was known for being on time with delivering what he needed to deliver. He always came in under budget, and with high quality footage. So, I mean, it almost sounds like Lumet when you hear about the way Lumet worked, where people couldn't believe, even like on Before the Devil Knows You're Dead, when he's making like, you know, to make a film that good at that age is remarkable. And it's because it's like, man, you're so economical. You have it so figured out of how you're going to shoot this, that you're able to just, I mean, if you got a good take, print it.
You know, just speaking of Lumet, I was listening to an interview with Ethan Hawke, and he was talking about making Before the Devil. And that when he and Philip Seymour Hoffman learned that Lumet was shooting it on video, like they both kind of went to them and was like, "What do you mean you're shooting this on video? Like, don't you want it like this should be like gritty, like Dog Day Afternoon, like it's gotta look like that."
Right.
And he looks at them and he's like, "Trust me, when I was shooting Dog Day Afternoon, we weren't using the highest quality stock of film that we could have used. I used this one because it was going to stand out, it was going to be gritty, it was going to look a certain way." And now everyone looks at that film and credits it as for that look. So trust me, a few years
don't
down
talk
the
to
line,
him about Dog Day Afternoon. I think don't reference his own film to him.
I made it, I know, right? But he said, he's like, trust me, a few years down the line, you're going to look back at this film and it's going to feel like it has a living quality to it because it was shot on this type of format. And he said, it was 10 years later where he looked at it again and he's like, wow, it really just, it stands out. Like it has that quality to it.
It's inspiring because it's like you wish that he had worked through his disappointment, right? Like I've made 10 albums and none of them have been a tremendous success. Like I've had pockets of fans here and there over the globe, but not like I can't live off my music, right? So it's like, but I have to know that I've made albums that I feel proud of and that I feel like are quality contributions to music, right? So it's like there has to be that built-in love for doing it that has to keep you through. And it's like, I just wish that because so many artists are recognized after their time, or maybe it wasn't this one that got them the notoriety, but that next one they made, they couldn't have made if they hadn't made A through E, right? And it's like, it's just too bad about, someone like Charles Lawton, he had his whole career as an actor, right? So he's already made tons of money off films, and this is something that he did. But it's like, for this guy, it's like, man, no one knows that name or story unless I didn't know his story before reading it the other day. I mean, it's amazing. There's a lot to be taken from it.
And that's the hard part is when you for him, it's like, this is the type of movie that I want to see, that I think is, and that no one liked it or saw it or responded to it. It hits you in a certain way of like, oh, you don't like me.
See, the thing is, this is the crazy thing about perception and truth and the bridge between, okay? We say that no one liked it or that no one responded to it. It can't be true, because there's got to have been, when did David Lynch, how old is David Lynch and when was he watching movies, right? There were people who went and saw that movie and were affected by it. Clearly. There were people who loved films and loved maybe avant-garde films or were looking for, and they went and they saw it. And maybe that doesn't necessarily quantify a success based on how people perceive it. But there had to have been people who liked it, and that is what is just unfortunate about the way Hollywood especially views a success. Because it's a business, right? And if that dinero isn't talking, guess what?
And that's the hard thing is because yes, this is an underground, unknown movie for most people. But if you go to people who love horror movies, they're all about Carnival of Souls.
And there were hip kids at that time who were either high school or college kids who saw that and were like, "You see Carnival of Souls? No, what's that?" The same way we talk about the records and stuff, it's the same thing. There's people who know and are looking for that next thing, and
that's why I have this thing now. It's like when I see a new movie, I'm hesitant to say anything about like how I feel about it, because it's like, well, 5 years down the line, how am I going to feel about it? 10 years down the line, how am I going to feel about it?
Right.
Because there's movies that I remember like 3 or 4 years ago saying like singing its praises, and now I'm like I could care if I saw it again or not.
Right.
But
it was great to see something like this hold up, though.
Yeah.
Because I remember how it affected me then.
Right.
Which was probably like 15 years ago.
Right.
And now to like come back to it, like, man, this film is almost 60 years old, and it's still this groundbreaking.
Yeah.
Something to be said for that, man.
Ahead of its time in like in a specific certain type of way.
Yes, aesthetically.
Yeah.
Like, and thematically, because we talked before the show about the idea of like horror being a great genre, and sci-fi as well, but like for bringing, and westerns too. I mean, that's the thing about these outer-lying genres that are really good about cloaking social themes,
right,
and not showing their hand, so that they actually can deliver that like, unseen hit. And he sort of started that movement unknowingly, that would influence future filmmakers like Romero and Peele to do what they do.
And that's what it's a shame, because it feels like it's only a genre of movie that I come to appreciate in full-blown effect in October. But that every time, like, we talk about westerns and science fiction, more than any other genre, horror movie seems to have, it keeps going, right? There's always going to be, the horror movie is always going to keep going.
Yeah.
People may not
and
make westerns anymore.
Right. There's like reinventions of it too, because it's like love it or hate it. Eli Roth has a certain aesthetic, right? Yeah. And it's funny because I don't necessarily like those really gory horror movies or splatter movies or things like that. But there's something about Eli Roth's confidence in what he's doing that this is what I'm trying to make. So love it or hate it, these three Hostel movies are what they are. There's something about those movies that I just dig. I think it's like really strong art direction. Like they're well made.
You can both be stylistic, visually compelling, and you can cloak however you feel about anything within a story.
Right.
And what was really cool about watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre again is because everyone thinks that movie is a gore fest, and it's not.
Right.
Save from a few moments.
Right.
But it's so well made and so effective that you think it's.
I mean,
just
one of
like
its
Psycho.
most iconic moments, two of its most iconic moments, don't even involve acts of violence.
Right.
It's the shutting of the door to the kill room.
Yep.
Like we're being shut out of the kill room. There's things going on in there that we're not seeing, right?
Right.
Nowadays they take you in the kill room.
Right.
And then when he's running behind the character with the chainsaw in that shot.
And again, being visual and style, it's picking the right lens, because that long lens makes you feel like he is right there behind her and she is not going to get away. And I was not to go off on a tangent about another movie, I was just kind of sitting back in awe about how much of that movie is one big chase that is so horrifying and so gripping. And then reading that Ridley Scott made Alien because he saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre and was like, wow.
I did read that, yeah.
But
that's cool.
I mean, it's an amazing genre when you get past the fact that there's so many bad horror movies out there, and get to the, either an underground film like this, or a classic, and just see how much you can do with it. You know, that's what I have come to love about this movie, is that Manny had a vision, and he wanted to get it across.
I forgot that the scene where she's driving and then he appears in the window is a rack focus.
Yep.
Her face is in focus, and then all of a sudden it ends. All of a sudden it's his, which is just such a great use of that technique.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's one of those things where there needs to be a reason for it, right? Otherwise it's just a device, and it's like.
And I also think that it's weird, because I think there's even a shot of just her face and nothing in the background, right? And something about the shot when it comes up, you're like, well, I mean, I feel like something's going to come out from that darkness.
Right.
And then the next shot is that, you know, it out of focus, but there's obviously an image, a face there. And then when it racks focus, I mean,
it's more haunting because you don't see the image at first.
And that's the type of effective filmmaking that you can get done.
Very memorable film.
Yeah. And even like, you know, there's you know, even amongst people who love it, you know, I think that people who say that there's an aspect to it that feels a little student filmish, and that you can feel how low a budget it is, and how much they there's a roughness to it that is because of its budget. But somehow it's charming.
It's almost like what Ed Wood wishes he was.
Right.
Right? If Ed Wood had cinematic technique.
It's what he thinks in Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Yes.
Yes.
Because all that charm and all of that, like chutzpah, as my parents used to say, is what gets him where he's going. Right? It's what allowed him to make however many films he made, but none of them are as good as Carnival Souls.
Right.
Right? So it's like, it's kind of interesting. Also, these threads, thematic threads from the different films that we do in these seasons. There's always these overlaps.
Yes. And again, and I think, and you know, the pleasure and the what you can get out of a true collaboration. You know, when you bring a group of people together and, you know, and work together.
That pride you have afterwards when you wrap and you're like, it's you know, I mean, I'm sure it's even if you're making a big budget film, when you wrap, that it's like an achievement, but you really feel like those Cassavetes films, man. I feel like when you were making that movie with him, you were all believing in his vision. Like he was the Wizard of Oz. You were like, we are gonna bring this home for John, right? Like that's like probably the idea. And it's like who knows what it was like to work with Herk Harvey on set, but it seems like he really knew how to get it done.
And you feel like they're like, you know, whether there was just a screening for the cast and crew, or just the first time they all could get together to watch it and just sit, the feeling of sitting there and being like, look what we did.
Right.
Like, isn't that so cool?
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's taking from so many things. I mean, it's like he clearly was a student of film, right? And it's so obvious.
Yeah. I mean, not every filmmaker goes out there and says, I want to make something like Birdman and Cocteau. Like
I mean, it's film language, right? Yeah. There's not words, but like imagery. Understanding that visual language and the landscape and studying it so that when you're setting out to create your own structure, you know the rules, and then you learn the rules so you can forget them and do your own thing. And I think that's what allows people like him and future filmmakers that he may have influenced to kind of do their own thing and say, I learned about aesthetic from all these people, but I know what I want this film to feel like. And it's got its own its own blood moving through its veins.
Right.
It just happens to know these different things that help it get where it's going.
Right. And another thing was like, you feel like he was a filmmaker that just, the audience just wasn't there yet. You know?
And how often does that happen? I mean, with these misunderstood films or forgotten films that you can't believe are as good as they are. I mean, Touch of Evil, there's a whole lot of people who don't know what Touch of Evil is.
Right. Well, and you know, what we just talked about with Seconds. You know, I was just feeling like, you look back on it and you watch it now and you're
like, Frankenheimer is the king of paranoid cinema.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's no, those two films, Manchurian Candidate and Seconds, set the groundwork for all these films that came out after. And I mean, you could make a similar case for this style of horror film.
Because surrealism and existential crises was not what we were going to drive-ins for.
Right.
But now you look back
there's
and it's
no
like, wow,
real,
I'd love to see
there's
that.
no gimmicks in this thing, right? It's devoid of gimmicks, which is, it makes sense because if you're only going to make one feature film in your career, you know, you're going to have a vision. And he clearly was a uncompromising artist, right? And there were other movies that he almost made, which is, it's a damn shame. There was one in particular that this gas escapes from this chemist's lab and like has this reaction on the townspeople, which made me think of Werner Herzog, Heart of Glass, where there's a mysterious element that is in this town that affects the people, and he actually hypnotized the town. But it's like, yeah, who knows what that would have been, man? And there was a screenplay that he wrote that he never made into a film, too. And so it wasn't any lack of ambition, or at least like, I don't know, it's that constant struggle. So much of it is being your own biggest supporter.
Like Ed Wood.
Right.
Yeah.
Man.
It's weird, like they each didn't have that, you know, maybe that was the thing that he lacked, like he didn't have that type of exuberance to kind of go and like sell himself and get behind himself.
Very well could be.
But he certainly had the talent.
Right.
Ed Wood had all of that.
Man, if they could have gotten together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ed Wood should have been his producer.
Right.
That would have been quite a team. Man.
It's really fun to kind of talk about, you know, I think every October, every Halloween, we should kind of do this, is kind of talk about a kind of a little known, because there's so many of them out there that no one really knows about or talks about. But
we brought up Freaks as a last episode, but and I think Todd Brownie has a few that could be examined, because he was kind of like this early master of horror, a different kind of horror film. And we could even explore some of the Corman movies and just see what, you know, how are these similar to an Ed Wood film or dissimilar? Because Corman clearly was an artist, right? There was artistry there, but he also had that kind of like sales
a
person.
movie that
like
keeps coming
hustle.
up on the podcast that I listen to is The Mask of the Red Death, which is an early Corman film that I'd love to watch. Vincent Price, that I'd love to watch. Like all those. Like
we had so many Poe adaptations. Nicholson was in a few of them. I mean, I would love to watch some of those. So
cool.
Yeah.
All right. Next week, Rumblefish.
Rumblefish. It's gonna be great. That one I've only seen once. So
it was
my friend JR's favorite film. So tune in to that one, JR.
And then Tony doesn't?
I don't think Tony's a big fan of that one. But yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be great.
Yeah, definitely.
All right.
Cool.